Hello and welcome to Katie and Jen's Disney Film Podcast.
A look at Disney and beyond.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Jen.
And this episode's film is...
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Let's get started.
This week I'm going to give the synopsis of the film in case you haven't seen it, listeners at home. Okay, so Snow White is based on a German fairy tale written by the Brothers Grimm. It was originally published in 1812 as Sneeuwwitchen, and it was adapted and released by Disney in 1937. The story is about a sweet princess who is pursued by her evil stepmother, and she goes to hide in the forest with the seven dwarfs. So Katie, would you like to start us off with a talking point? Because as you know, I looked into the original at length, and a big thing I want to talk about is what things they didn't include in this version.
Well, if you'd like to, you go ahead.
Okay, I would love to, actually, because the original, being a Grimm's fairy tale, is of course very gory, and it had a lot of extra things which I'm sure Disney would not want to put in one of their films. The first one's not too gory, but just kind of strange. Snow White was born after the Queen, her mother, pricked her finger while sewing and admires the drops of blood which have fallen on the snow on the black windowsill. So she wishes for a daughter who has skin like snow, lips red as blood, and hair like ebony. And then obviously she does have this daughter, Snow White. The Queen dies so that the King can remarry the evil Queen. Big plot point. Snow White grows very beautiful, like she does in the Disney film, and the Queen becomes very jealous of her. She has the huntsman take Snow White out to the forest to kill her. Of course, he can't because she's so sweet, so she runs away into the forest. And the Queen's asked him to bring the lungs and the liver to her, unlike the heart from the Disney version. And when he does, she has them prepared by her cook and then eats them.
Wow, that's horrific.
Not too Disney.
No.
So then, of course, Snow White's run away into the forest and she finds the dwarfs, just as we know. And the Queen is consulting her magic mirror, who tells her Snow White's still alive. Still fueled with intense jealousy, she thinks of some different ways that she can kill Snow White. And in the original, there were actually three. So the first one, she disguises herself as a lady selling bodices, and she gives the most beautiful bodice to Snow White as a gift, laces her in super tightly so that Snow White can't breathe. She faints, the Queen leaves her for dead. Luckily, the dwarfs come home just in time and they cut her out. So she survives death attempt 1. Secondly, the Queen, obviously she's gone home feeling really good about herself, consults the magic mirror. Who's the most beautiful, even though she thinks she knows the answer? And he says, oh, hey, wait, guess what? Snow White still lives. So the Queen is just getting more and more insane with this jealous rage. Next, she disguises herself as a different woman who sells combs, and she brushes Snow White's hair with this poisoned comb. And again, Snow White faints, and again, the dwarfs save her. Then the Queen's third attempt is just like in the film, it's a poison apple. By this point, thank goodness, Snow White is a little bit wary of old women giving her gifts, so she doesn't want to eat the apple. The Queen has cleverly only poisoned half, so she cuts the apple in half, eats it, and is like, ooh, delicious, but, she's not eating the poison half, so Snow White eats the poison half. And again, she goes down, this time into suspended animation. And this time, the dwarves can't revive her, so very sadly, they have to bury her, and she's too beautiful to put in the ground, so they put her in this glass coffin. And in the original, the prince, who has never met Snow White previously, just happens to be traveling through the land, sees this dead girl in a coffin, is so besotted by her that he convinces the dwarves to let him take her away in her coffin. But as his servants are carrying it out, they stumble on roots and drop her. The force of it makes the piece of poisoned apple fall out of her throat, and she comes back to life, and the prince is overjoyed, and they decide to get married. Incidentally, the evil Queen is invited to the wedding, and her mirror has told her that the young Queen is now the most beautiful woman in the land. So she goes, very doubtfully, full of trepidation, to this wedding, discovers that the young Queen is in fact Snow White, and as punishment for her attempted murders, Katie, I believe you know,
the Queen is forced to wear hot iron shoes and dance until she drops dead.
What a way to go.
Yes. It's interesting that it's not a kiss that saves Snow White. It just, if they'd have been able to do the Heimlich manoeuvre on her, they'd have got that bit of poisoned apple out.
Heimlich, of course.
Yeah. It isn't called the Heimlich anymore. I believe it's called abdominal thrusts.
Oh, really?
I,
Good.
I think they tried to copyright Heimlich so that you had to pay if you taught it to people.
Oh, that's good to know, because actually, recently, Nick, who is my husband, for people who don't know that, was choking on a piece of meat, and he said to me, "I'm choking, give me the Heimlich," and I did, and he wasn't choking anymore. But I didn't realise when we told this story of my heroic bravery that actually we have been telling it wrong. So that's good to know.
Back to Snow White and her evil queen mother dancing in hot iron shoes. That's I don't know, dancing in hot iron shoes till you die. So do you die because the shoes are so hot, or do you die because you're dancing for, the rest of your life?
Well, I guess it's a good fail-safe plan, because if the hot iron shoes don't kill you, then dancing until you die will kill you, because the clue's in the name. You have to do it until you die.
Yeah.
I think that you would surely you would just pass out from the pain.
Well, that's what I thought. You'd go
and then you'd be still made to dance.
Yeah. That's gonna be a lot of work for like a torturer, isn't it? Because she's not gonna do that by herself.
When I originally read they made her dance until she died, I thought, was that at their wedding party? They put the shoes on her and said, "Now dance until you die," and the guests, instead of having a first dance with the bride and groom, the guests just had to watch the queen dances off to death.
But I suppose it provides Snow White with a bit more character and nous than the Disney film did. But then again, perhaps if you've had attempted murder 3 times and been forced to go into stasis in a see-through coffin, that does things to you.
Yeah, I mean, she was probably pretty psychologically damaged by the end, and I would say she would be quite a paranoid person, rightly so.
Going to talk about the dwarves now.
Yes.
Because there's a great document. In fact, you can find a lot of these almost anywhere. There was about 50 names for the dwarfs that were out there, and these are just some of my favourites.
I've also got a list of some of my favourites.
Excellent. We shall share them now. So I liked Awful, Biggie, Blabby, Dirty, Gabby, Gaspy, Hotsy, Jaunty, Jumpy, Nifty and Shifty.
I have a lot of same ones. You said Dirty.
Yes.
And Jaunty, Nifty and Shifty I have as well. The other ones I liked. You said Biggie. I saw one of them was Biggie Wiggy.
Oh, I saw Biggie and Biggie Wiggy.
Ah, excellent.
But how you would portray that, because he's a dwarf, so would he be a bigger dwarf than the other dwarfs? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I also liked Deefy, which doesn't mean anything, and I don't see how they would make a personality out of that. Gloomy, I like. And also I saw Hoppy Jumpy.
Yeah, he'd be good. I think it's probably a good job that they didn't use those names.
Yeah. Another thing I found out about the names was that in every country that this film was released, there were different names for the dwarves, even in Germany where the story comes from, despite originally them having no individual names.
Right. Just 7 dwarves. Yeah. There's a bit when Snow White goes up and they've got all their names on the beds, and she goes in and she reads them and says, "That's a strange name for children." And you think, you're called Snow White. That's not exactly a normal name, is it?
That's funny that you say that, because actually when I saw that bit, I thought how sweet that is that she thinks it's a house of children that she's about to take care of. Too hard on thinking they were funny names. But yeah, you're right. Snow White is
not usual.
A typical name.
No. I've got some information on some of the voices. Pinto Colvig, who voiced Sleepy and Grumpy, is the original Goofy. And he also provided Pluto's barks.
Huh.
Yeah. And Billy Gilbert, who voiced Sneezy, he was known for his sneeze routines on vaudeville. Now, vaudeville is the American version of music hall. His act was that he was about to sneeze and he'd get more and more worked up and his voice would get higher and higher until eventually he would sneeze, which is obviously what Sneezy does in the film. So he was picked for the role of Sneezy because of his job on vaudeville.
Lucille Laverne, who voiced the Wicked Queen, who obviously also then turns into the old hag queen. When she auditioned, they said, "You make a great wicked queen, but we need an old hag." Apparently, she left the room, came back in, and did a spot-on old hag voice. And they asked how she did it, and she said, "Oh, I just took my teeth out."
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's very, very good. Good job, Lucille Levin. And then the other voice thing I found out was that Adriana Caselotti, who voiced Snow White, was put into a really strict contract with Disney because he wanted to keep the voice as a one-time sound. So despite being a classically trained singer, she actually never had a singing part in a film ever again, except apparently she had a very small bit part in The Wizard of Oz.
See, I read this, and knowing the very small amount that I do know about film and contracts and things like that, I looked further into it because it didn't seem to sit right with me, because I know Disney do contract people, but I don't think they started doing that until much later on. And the whole her not being able to work again seems to be based on a story of Jack Benny asking Disney for Caselotti to appear on his show and Disney saying no. And it sort of occurs to me that the voice actors for Snow White weren't credited. Disney didn't start crediting actors until 1943. She wasn't known as the voice of Snow White, so she wasn't famous in today's terms. So we know, for example, who voiced Elsa in Frozen, and she will probably get work off the back of that, where Caselotti wasn't famous beforehand. She was a 19-year-old chorus girl. So perhaps she didn't actually get any work for that reason, and Disney wouldn't use her again because she was too familiar as Snow White.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I'm glad that you looked into that, because I always like to find out a fact on top of a fact.
Definitely. She did, as you say, have an uncredited line in The Wizard of Oz, but that would have compromised the contract if it existed. So I don't think that it did. That's just my opinion, and it's, very sad that she didn't get any more work, but I'm not 100% sure it was Disney's fault.
Maybe if someone does know the real story, they could let us know.
How could they let us know, Jen?
I was hoping you'd say that. They can let us know on Twitter at KJDPod, or
via email, kjdpodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook.
I think my next fact is going to be about, this is actually one of my favourite ones. When this film came out, the common pluralization of dwarf was dwarfs, which is hard to communicate over a podcast, so bear with me.
With an F.
J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, one of my favourite books of all time, gradually popularised dwarves with a V, and after that the Disney version has been often erroneously referred to as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You're welcome. Yeah, it was hard to make the f and the v, they kind of sound similar.
You could have spelt it out loud.
Oh my goodness. A new use for technology. Okay, Disney is DWARFS, but sometimes known as DWARVES.
I had that fact as well, I have to say, as a spelling enthusiast. I
had it as a Tolkien enthusiast, so I'm glad that powers combined.
Well, going on the subject of classic literature, Walt Disney had to tell a porcupine and convince the makers of the film that dopey was in fact a word used by Shakespeare, because they were concerned about having a word so modern in a classic fairy tale. So he said, no, don't worry, it's a Shakespearean word, and actually it's not. But he said it with so much conviction, I imagine, that they went with it.
And I mean, also, he's obviously a very important figure at the Walt Disney Company, being Walt Disney of the Walt Disney Company. So I imagine what he says goes a few times.
I've got a little fact that I don't really want to dwell on very long, but I just think it needs saying anyway, that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was rumoured to be one of Hitler's favourite films.
Yeah, I saw that too, along with King Kong and something else.
Yeah. Should we move on?
Let's. I found out that during the film's premiere engagement at New York City's Radio City Music Hall, after they finished the run, all of the velvet seats needed to be replaced because children wet themselves in fear at every single showing. And it was Snow White and the Forest that did it.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me.
That seems terrifying. One of the notes I made when I was watching this was I would totally freak out in those woods too.
Are the woods really like that, or is that a depiction of Snow White's turmoil from running away from home and being frightened?
Because I know that you aren't afraid of anything, as I was watching it, I thought, this is hideous. And then I thought, wait, is it real or is it her imagination? But I can safely say that either way is equally scary.
Okay. Yeah, I have to admit that they are scary scenes, and I was speaking to a 3-year-old girl yesterday about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and she said that she did like it, but it is a bit baddie because the witch is scary. So still today, children are a bit scared of the witch. The ride in Disneyland Paris,
just thinking of that,
is scary.
It's also scary.
Yeah.
When you see the witch looking in the mirror as herself, and then she suddenly spins around with her evil laugh, and she's the scary witch.
Yeah.
That terrifies me. That is a scary ride.
I know a lot of adults and children who have been frightened by that.
I'm one of the adults. I don't know which children. One of the errors that was noticed after the film was made was that apparently in the last scene the prince shimmies because his cells weren't lined up correctly. Walt Disney was horrified by it, but they were so over budget that they couldn't fix it. And until the digital restoration in 1993, the prince just shimmied in that last scene, which I didn't see. The initial budget for this film was $250,000, which was 10 times more than the usual budget for the animated things they'd been producing thus far, which were the Silly Symphonies shorts. But the budget actually ended up in an excess of $1.4 million. Happily, the film ended up making tons of money, and they made back the 1.4 million and actually made 4 times as much as any other film in 1938.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It paid for a building at the studios, didn't it?
I think it paid for a whole studio.
Yeah.
Burbank.
That's it. And there's a picture, I've seen a picture of it, and it has actually got the dwarves carved into the front of the building.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, it's a nice picture.
Yeah, I think they really took a chance on this film. Actually, one of the other things I had written down was that the working title for this film was Walt Disney's Folly, because people thought it was the worst idea he'd ever had. And he took a big chance. There weren't any other feature-length animated films at that time, but this one paved the way for what is now an enormous industry.
So, after all those facts, Jen, do you want to say what your opinion of the film is, or should I go first?
Would you like to go first? Because I feel like I just spoke a lot and there should be some balance.
All right. When you're watching this film, you have to respect the history of it because it paved the way for everything else that came, and it was such a massive risk for Walt Disney to take. And there was no one really saying that it would work. I think his own wife was documented as saying it would be a flop.
Wow.
And I don't think it can be judged by today's standards of film, either with the animation, the storyline, the soundtrack, anything. It was made in 1937. It took 5 years, I think. And the first spoken words on film was only 10 years prior to that. So before that, all films were silent. Yeah, well, Warner Brothers' The Jazz Singer came out in 1927. And then just 10 years later, you've got the first animated feature film. If you think that Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz came 2 years after Snow White, then its place in history cannot be argued with. So I'm not going to say many negative things about it because I don't think it can be judged harshly. It is a very slow-paced film. It must have been agonising to put together because up until then they'd done 10, 15-minute cartoons. So to do 1 hour and 20 must have felt like a massive achievement. There's not a lot of dialogue, but that's probably for obvious reasons, especially if they'd only been making talkies for 10 years. There's lots of things referencing to that sort of time, like the guy who voiced Sneezy was on vaudeville, and also I think that Dopey reminds me so much of Harpo Marx. I don't know if you've seen any of the Marx Brothers films.
I have not.
Watch Duck Soup or Animal Crackers. Harpo Marx was the mute. He never said anything, so it was all slapstick, it was all mime, and Dopey is very reminiscent of that. So even then, Walt Disney was tapping into what was popular and using that within his films, which I think is a massive achievement.
I like your opinions of films because I feel like you get a real overview, whereas when I'm watching the films, I always just think, how do I feel about this moment at this point?
Right.
So I'm glad that you started to give a feel, and also for the time period.
Well, trust me, when we get on to Newsies, it will be all emotional.
Well, I watched this film yesterday to remind myself of it with my mum, who loves this film and actually loves all Disney films and is very excited about our podcast. But Snow White is one of her favourites because it was her mum's favourite. So I think for both my mum and I, when we were watching it in a very positive light. And it was very different to how I remembered it. I haven't watched it in a really long time. And it's so different to films today. Like you said, the pacing is very different and there isn't a lot of talking, but I did enjoy it.
What did you think of the songs in Snow White?
I liked them as I was watching the film, but I don't actually think that any of them, perhaps with the exception of Hi Ho, are particularly memorable. And if you were to ask me what are your favourite 100 Disney songs, I don't think anything from Snow White would come up in that top 100. How about you?
I thought the opposite, actually. I couldn't believe how many I recognised when I watched it. Obviously, Hi Ho, very, very popular. But Whistle While You Work, I have actually been whistling that since I watched it. I think it's very catchy, and I sort of forgot that it was in Snow White. I forgot Someday My Prince Will Come was in Snow White. In fact, if you'd have asked me before I watched it yesterday, I think I would have said it was probably Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. And the I'm Wishing song, I know very well because Morecambe and Wise did a parody of it where Ernie Wise was dressed as the handsome prince and Eric Morecambe was down the well doing the echo. It's a great sketch if you can look it up. I imagine it's on YouTube. Everything seems to be these days. It is a very funny sketch. And I watched a lot of Morecambe and Wise when I was young, so I actually knew the songs better than the film.
That's interesting. You know, with that song, I'm Wishing, as I watched it, I was wondering, I found out that in Mary Poppins, when, I can't for the life of me think what the song's called, when they clean up the bedroom.
Spoonful of Sugar.
Yep, I knew you would. Apparently, Mary Poppins was the voice of the birds that she sings with as well, so they recorded 2 tracks.
Yeah, she provides the whistles.
Oh, you know everything. Well, when I was watching Snow White, I wondered, did they do that in that film as well? So when she's singing with the birds, is she just singing with her own bird voice? Because they have a kind of a whistly voice. Anyway, if anyone knows, then they can let us know. Clear this up for me.
How can they let us know, Jen?
They can let us know on Twitter at KJDPod or by
On email at kjdpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. The song that the Dwarfs sing, the silly song, Ho home, the tune is dumb. I think I knew that from a Disney CD that I had probably in my early teens. And I liked it because I liked the lyrics of it. And also it's probably one of the ones from Snow White you can actually sing because Snow White's voice and pitch is so high that you can't sing along with Snow White.
Snow White's voice, you cannot sing along with Snow White.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And nobody sounds like that on film these days.
No. And, you know, I was thinking, actually, as I was watching it, her voice is great as Snow White, obviously, and it's very unique. But I thought, in real life, were people unkind to her because her voice is so high, even when she speaks? And I hope that they weren't. I hope that everybody just thought she was very sweet.
I hope so too. Perhaps she was very sweet. Do you think that they got the idea for Bambi from animating all of those deer? Because there was a lot of deer in that film.
There were so many deer, and there was just so many forest creatures. And I wanted the same thing, because also in Bambi, where you see all of the animals of the forest, they're all the same kind of animals as Snow White. So actually, maybe, I feel like it's entirely plausible that they did think, let's make a film about deer.
Definitely you get ideas from whatever you're working on at the time. And if they thought, we can draw deer really well, let's make a film.
If that's the case, then why hasn't there been a horse film? Because they always have great-looking horses,
But
even in the film.
Perhaps that's why they put a horse in almost every film, rather than just focusing solely on the horse.
They do put a horse in almost every film. But as we were talking about a film they made about deer, I feel like a film about horses, maybe that's coming up.
Perhaps it is. Maybe you should write to the Walt Disney Studios and say, look, horses, what an idea.
We want a horse film, please.
Oh, it's good that you said please.
Yeah, I should have said it first. And I made some notes of comments my mum made on it, which was the first one, when the film starts and you have to read the kind of intro in that book, you know that bit?
Yep.
It says the queen was so jealous of Snow White that she made her be a scullery maid, and my mum said, almost indignantly, how many people know what scullery maid is these days?
That's true, actually. It's a fair point.
And how many? If you know what a scullery maid is, then please raise your hand on Twitter or email or Facebook.
Hashtag scullery maid.
Yeah, hashtag scullery maid. I want to see that. And the other things, I just wrote down things that I liked in my opinion section. So I really liked Doc a lot, and I liked the things he said, and I liked that he was always stumbling over his words. That made me laugh almost every time. And I also liked how when he'd be searching for a word, Grumpy would give him the wrong word, and then he would say it and then realize what he'd said and be angry. That's a joke that doesn't get old. I liked some of the effects, actually. And I noticed that the water that's in the well at the start of the film when Snow White's singing I'm Wishing is very differently animated to later where the dwarves are washing in that trough. And I read something and then I lost it and couldn't find it again about how they used real effects like filming smoke and things in front of the animation to give that effect. I think that that's what they did for the mirror, but as I said, I couldn't find the fact again, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But I actually wondered if at the start the water in the well when she's singing was real water, and I don't know how they did it, but they somehow filmed through it. It was an interesting use of early film special effects. I would like to tell you a story, if you're sitting comfortably, and if you aren't, then please do. This is a story that my mum told me about my grandmother as a child. So my nan was born in 1937 when this film came out, but of course before people had televisions in their homes, cinemas would just, I suppose, re-show films and things. So this is after the war, the army barracks in Burnham-on-Crouch, which is where my nan lived and where my mum lived and where I grew up. They put on a show for children, and they had a picture show, which was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it was actually the first cartoon my nan had ever seen. And my mum said she was just totally blown away. And that was actually where her love of Walt Disney films began.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, it's very touching. And my nan actually passed away just the year before last, so all like sweet stories about her, are especially touching.
Absolutely.
And my mum said actually when she was clearing out my nan's house, this kind of goes into another thing we might talk about, which is merchandise, of which I own none. When they were clearing out my nan's house, they found 3 China dwarfs, and they were obviously part of a set, but we don't know where the other 4 are, but the 3 that exist are currently here. But I haven't seen them, so I can't tell you who they are. It's a mystery.
Well, perhaps you could update us at a later podcast when you do find them.
Yes, why not?
Do you want to talk about any other merchandise that you have? Do you have any?
I don't own any currently, and I'm not sure if I ever did. This is probably a question for my mum, because she has a good memory for these things. But off the top of my head, I don't think I have any Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs merchandise. Do you?
I have a hoodie that I purchased at my last trip to Disneyland Paris with Grumpy on it. It says, "Bad temper, stay far away," with Grumpy on the front. I collect Tsum Tsums and Tsum Tsum squishies, and I've got the Tsum Tsums of Snow White, Happy, Grumpy, Dopey, I think, and I've got the squishy of Snow White. And when I was little, although this story cannot be clarified by my mum because she can't remember, but I'm almost certain that my headboard had transfers of the Seven Dwarfs on it. But like I say, that story is unclarified by anyone other than myself. At this point in the podcasts, what we intend to do is set up a leaderboard so that the films that we look at, we will judge against each other and finally come up with reigning champion of our collective favourite Disney film. As we've only looked at Snow White, it will go in the middle of the leaderboard and the next episode's film will be judged against it. And then as the podcasts go on, we shall see
which is the ultimate Disney film to rule all other Disney films, perhaps with a magic ring.
Yes, that is exactly what we'll do.
Okay.
I think it's about time we wrap this podcast up.
That sounds great, and it has been great talking to you tonight about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
It has. It's been a lot of fun, and I've learnt a lot.
Me too. It's always nice to go back to a film that you remember from childhood but haven't seen in a long time and revisit those familiar feelings.
Well, do you know what, Jen?
What?
We're going to be doing an awful lot of that for these podcasts. Isn't that an exciting concept?
It is an exciting concept, and I am very happy to be embarking on this podcast quest with you, where I get to go back and watch all the films that I've loved since I was a kid, and maybe some new ones too.
And we will reveal the film that we're looking at in the next podcast in our Midway podcast, which is going to be a mini podcast that you can download in between the main podcast episodes. Thank you very much for downloading this podcast.
And if you have any friends who are also healthy fans of Disney, then please recommend this podcast to them too.
That's right, the more people listen, the better.
The more the merrier.
So that only leaves me to say thank you very much from me, Katie.
Thank you very much from me, Jen.
And we'll see you next time on Katie and Jen's Disney Film Podcast.
See you next time.